X being true is true, and you're saying X being true that is true is also true, and ad infinitum, this is just going to be the like power set of like S.
Wait, hold on. So secret. So before like we continue on this shit, so you mind if I upload this? But it's gotta be. I mean, probably the title of this Axiom and secret debate so hard to break the reality. So knowledge.
It's a good debate. Bet. If it's a good debate,
Yeah, it'll be a good debate. It'll be a good debate. So this is gonna be some knowledge thing, knowledge debate, whatever. So yeah. So essentially,
so
it's
let me.
yeah. So to specify specifically what you're saying, it's essentially yeah, but it's essentially just gonna be ad infinitum towards the subset of S and S as a set of S essentially.
Yeah, because hold on, because no matter how hard you try to say, if you say if you say X is true, and then you say the proposition X is true, necessarily the proposition X is true is necessarily greater than X is true, and then ad infinitum. Therefore, you cannot have a complete. Okay, hold on. So you cannot have you cannot have an epistemically complete set of knowledge.
Wait, hold on. Doesn't the proposition S holds the value specifically with this with that set proposition is contained by the set proposition of S?
See that again?
Okay, so let's say that proposition S is true as you claim will lead to ad infinitum, and you said okay let's say that set S is true, and the proposition of set S is also stated true, and you claim it's like an infinitum. So wouldn't it just be the same value considering the set proposition of S is true, and the S if that is also true, provided it pertains to the same factor, so it would just be both true, logically speaking, and therefore would just be leading to
Yeah,
ad infinitum. It just be stating
yeah,
something more semantically different. Yeah.
yeah. Hold on, yeah, but hold on. They have the same in the sense that they have the same truth value, and there's a correspondence between them. But we have something called meta language. The meta language assigns truth or falsity to different propositions. For example, if I say the proposition X is true, that's giving the true value to the proposition. So when you say,
So
yeah, hold on, so I see what you mean. One sec. So yeah, sure, they can have like the same value, but still, when you semantically speak of, it's still a distinct proposition because semantically they are trying to refer to different states of the proposition. For example, the proposition X is false is true. The proposition X is false being false is true, and ad infinitum. They are still distinct propositions no matter what, but yes, based on correspondence, they would have true value.
okay, but via knowing that all of these specific truths, essentially, why does it like kind of disrupt like the whole value of omniscience? If you can hold said values of like all this thing is false, this thing and this proposition of this thing is false, and then the proposition of this not true, which says that this false is also false, and you say it's gonna lead to an infinitum. Yeah, that's kind of like some form of like something abstract, which can be correspondence towards. So you know all these abstract concepts correlates or formulate throughout a line. For example, like an infinite regress essentially. But I don't see how this kind of affects like the whole point of the omniscience. You can still know all of this. I mean, we said humans know all this, and we don't know the conceptions of like omniscience between our minds and all of that. Like,
Yeah, because I established in conclusion one that therefore knowledgeable subsets of S, i.e., the power set of all truths, is not possible for the omniscient being as it's mathematically undrivable. Now I'm going to explain to you why it's mathematically undrivable. Because if it's mathematically undrivable, then if it's mathematically undrivable, then you can't know all sets because it can't be derived to fall under the criteria of being all truth, if you know what I mean. Right? So, for example, yeah, so I already gave the X being true thing. But strictly in cardinality, you're assigning a proper class. For example, if you say X is true and you say XXX is true, then that's okay. Proper class one of okay, the proposition S, and then if you say S is true, the proposition S is true. That's gonna be power class two, and then strictly be greater than each other. Each power class, when you say X, then you're just gonna have a higher power class. Therefore, you cannot actually have it, which is you can't have like a complete infinite set. So if you so that's a problem now, because then if the set is not complete, then God can't actually be omniscient. Omniscient by definition is knowing all truth. But if it's mathematically underivable and there's no such thing as all truth, since the set of knowledge is underivable, then like it entails a contradiction.
Wait, when you say like mathematically derivable, I mean, what do you define as underivable in this case? Because I mean,
Underivable.
if yeah, continue, continue. If you find that person, I'll give like a rebuttal to what you just said earlier.
Sorry. What did you say?
Yeah, I'm like, can you define the what we could like give your definition of like underivable you.
Yeah. So when you say
Und-
something, when you what the,
okay, so um, hello, you're kind of lagging. Secret, you're lagging. Secret, you're lagging, bro. You're lagging, bro. Secret, you're lagging, bro. Your mic, man. I don't understand what's wrong with the mic, but yeah, you're kind of lagging. Like, dude, fix that. Okay. So just listen for a bit. Just listen. Secret. You're cutting out, bro. You're cutting out.
hello. Okay,
Okay, okay, but
when you say something's math, hello, hello, hello. It means you, yeah, yeah, you can't. Hello, one sec. Hello,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, so that's nigga. Okay, so oh yeah, he left. So I'll just I guess explain that. So underival means that package, letter, message, or email can be what? No, we don't need to refer to words like package, letter, message, or email, whatever the fuck. Can be delivered to its intended recipient. This can be due to various reasons, such as incorrect, incomplete address. No, shut the fuck up, nigga. It's not that type of like scenario I'm looking. So underival deliver. What it says deliverable. Are we dead? Okay.
yo,
Oh my god. The search on fucking derivable. I mean derivable. Hold on. They're underivable. It is not capable of being derived or deduced from something else. It implies a concept or idea that cannot be obtained or reach logical reasoning or inference from other established knowledge. I'll just explain this. An infinite regress of like well um knowledge or set truths of set proposition S and the true position of S or whatever. By like when you said by Cantor's theorems for any set S, the cardinality of the power set S of PS is strictly greater than the cardinality of S. That is, PS is greater than S. It's the proposition of S is true, and then we can derive the fact that well another form of PS and like is also true, and then this can be false, and the proposition of it being false would be true, yada yada yada, which is an infinite regress upon like actuality between the truths of the propositions. So to say this, right, it's not essentially underivable. If you were like to be infinite in actuality, you contain all specific truths of something. You can contain infinite knowledge of something doesn't imply the fact they'll be underivable by mathematically. Because by how do I say this? Like if you were to deliver an infinite amount of packages and all that, for example, let's just give out a package analogy. Since infinite packages relates to something that they hold something inside and then they will bring upon to said user infinitely. It's not the fact that it's underivable, it's the fact that you contain all said truths of said packages or all said collectives of all said packages. Now if you were to say you have all sets of knowledge and all sets of truths of knowledge infinitely, it's not the fact that it's underivable, it's the fact that you hold said thing and therefore via ontological distributions, not just ontological distributions, conceptual distributions will lead to relational to the mind and mental capacity, which correlates to infinite knowledge. Yeah, it's kind of like what Omniscience is.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
knowing. everything can be infinite doesn't imply the fact underivable. Mathematically corresponds to the thing that you know as a knowledge of the subset S and proposition S. Yeah.
Yeah, again, basically, the reason why it's mathematically underivable because if you're gonna have state a proposition X, X must necessarily have a power set that we assign to called power set 2. Okay. For example, if you say X is true, then you say X being true is true. This is gonna assign a power class. Okay. And each power class, every time you say X is true, and ad infinitum, they are strictly greater in cardinality. Okay. So you can't say it's a absolute infinite because you can't say it's a completed infinite because it's underivable mathematically due to the power sets and cardinality being assigned to them individually. And also, again, as I extrapolated in premise 6, since PES, power set of S, is greater than S, strictly reality, there can be no one-to-one correspondence bijection between S and PS, meaning that the being cannot know all subsets of S if it only knows S. Okay, because then it's not gonna know. Hold on, yeah. So it's not gonna know each single like subset of S because every single subset of S is gonna be mathematically underivable. If you keep dividing these subsets more and more, you're just gonna reach to a point where you can't even identify them as set theoretic sets. Okay, so for example, in ZFC logic, we have something called set theoretic sets. Set theoretic sets are sets that can actually be derivable by mathematical definitions, right? But if you have a mathematically underivable set, then that set is not complete. Okay, so yes, so it's not complete. Then you're just saying that God have omniscience because omniscience, if God's knowledge is not complete, then you're saying He does not know all propositions, which entails a contradiction. Yeah, which by definition of omniscience would entail a contradiction. Do you agree?
I mean, obviously, it's possible debate. I mean, I wouldn't say I agree and stuff, but like, so, the thing that I'm just gonna like put into question here is like, once you said that it would just lead to the part that you won't even be able to identify it because it goes upon ad infinitum. Isn't ad infinitum going on to the point that essentially you're just like how do I say it? Like you cannot conceptualize all of them is because if you conceptualize this thing, it would derive and develop something else, and therefore you have to conceptualize that concept, and you have to go on infinitum, and there's no end to that. Essentially, you wouldn't be able to reach said thing, meaning you can uh grab all of that shit, but you can still identify said concepts that you divide. But so yeah, why would I imply the fact that it would not be like undefinable? Like it can be undefined, yeah, identified by essentially our mental capacities. And just to say it right, if you have like all subsets of S, and since all subsets of S is corresponds towards proposition S, and you say both of these things are true in state being, I mean not state, bro. What am I talking about, bro? I'm so retarded. Is state of conceptions or that, or like the variables and all that. And like once you grant the fact that it would divide infinitely, you still keep them upon your knowledge. The fact that once it goes upon infinitely, those are specific truths that you contain. Meaning it's still given the fact that it's gonna be derivable, but in a sense, when it's infinitely derivable, not in the sense that it's underivable, because by like definition, underivable means not capable of being derived or deduced from something else. Meaning you cannot literally derive from like a conclusion or something. You can still derive something if you grant infinitely of setting, just that there's no stop in it. Like the contract hypothesis to claim that it would be uh, like underivable infinite would be kind of stupid because something is underivable is something that cannot be deduced from something else and implies a concept or idea that cannot be obtained or reached through logical reasoning or inference of other established knowledge. Mean you cannot gain said thing at the foundation of that thing, but the entire purpose of infinite subset of propositions being true or whatever is that what you contain all this said thing to be true upon your uh, mind and concept. Meaning to obtain infinite sets of truth, infinite subsets of truth, and the contrasting hypothesis would be falsified since you can still derive from said things. It's going to be going upon an infinite regress that should derive from said thing. Yeah, you can continue.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think God's knowledge is a set?
Bro. Yeah, continue. My bad. Continue.
Yeah. I'm saying. Hold on. Do you think God's knowledge is a set? Yes or no?
Do I think God's knowledge is a set? I mean, if you derive from a conception as a set, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, okay, so basically we have, again, I think I have to establish, like prior, I said that we have something called set theoretic sets. Set theoretic sets can actually include infinity, but basically these elements that exist in infinity, for example, 5, 6, 7, 8, they all exist in infinity, right? Correct? But, so yes, a set theoretic set can contain infinite amount of elements. But the problem is that we have something external to ad infinitum, right? We have something called mathematically underivaable set, because in GMC, hold on. In GMC, we can actually derive infinity, right? We can derive infinity, complete versions of infinity. We're saying that something that is actually beyond infinity that can actually not even be derived by mathematical deduction. For example, let's say ordinals. Okay, we have ordinals. For example, infinity. If you take one away from infinity, you still have infinity, right? But if you add infinity, if you add one to infinity, it's strictly going to be greater than cardinal. It's going to have a strictly greater cardinality. The reason they say this is because we're talking about. Uh, Hold on, your mic is lagging. Anyways, the reason this is because we have orders of ordinals, and ordinals they basically must necessarily be added upon the cardinals being added to. Okay, for example, if you say, okay, hold on, so if I say x is greater, hold on, if I say x is one proposition, and then I say x is true, then that's going to necessarily entail strictly greater cardinality by the concept of ordinals. And I need to talk about something else real quick about ZFC. So again,
Okay.
in the proposition, yeah, again. So basically, as we can see here, we can say in premise 4, if S contains all truths known by the omniscient being, the omniscient being's knowledge corresponds to S. Okay, but the one-to-one correspondence of the bijection between S and its power set would necessarily have a gap between would necessarily have a gap between power sets. For example, if you can say that the power set if you set the power set infinity and then you say the power set infinity plus one and then the power set infinity plus infinity, you can say that, oh well, if you add anything to infinity it's not going to be greater, right? Sure, that's true in the cardinal sense, but when you talk about the ordinal sense, there's still going to be something more added upon infinity. So because it entails logical absurdities and ordering of mathematical constructs if you even try to deduce something. So if you even try to deduce that infinity cannot be greater or smaller, right? Uh, yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree that
Yeah.
something
So
cannot be. Yeah, hold on. I agree that something. I don't. I think if you try to subtract anything from infinity, it will still remain infinity because it's gonna become greater again, if you know what I mean. But if you add something upon infinity, you're just adding a higher, you're giving it a higher hierarchy of infinity. You're gonna just start having a higher hierarchy of infinity, and then we have infinite times infinite, because we know that there are some infinities greater than other infinities. So we're saying that we're talking about something that's mathematically underivaable. When something's mathematically underivaable by set theory, that means it is outside of all hierarchies of infinity. It's absolutely underivaable. It's not a definable set.
okay, so is that it? Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So to get the entire main point that you're arguing essentially is that, well, there are things extrinsic to infinity, and those things can be considered mathematically underivable. That is extrinsic attributes outside of this conceptions of infinity that we says as an axiom. If I'm correct.
yeah. So yeah, again, just remember the set theoretic set theoretic sized sets, right? So keep that in mind, because set theoretic sized sets are basically sets that are actually derivable.
Yeah, so essentially once you said that, well, if there is something external to said infinity and it goes on infinity, and there's also going to be another thing that's external from infinity, and we can logically deduce this like a derivable by claiming that ad infinitum it goes infinitely from like any which higher frameworks formed of infinity corresponds towards a set variables essentially. If we have like a subset S, we have like the proposition truth of S, And we have an that's also greater than the subset of S, since it holds the proposition, the foundation of S. And then we can like divide it infinitely to a greater scale logically via like well, what the foundations of the variables is and the given truth values between these variables. And once it divides infinitely, it's said thing, and therefore once it's extrinsic goes up and ad infinitum. So by getting what your argument is, I'm just gonna like state this one out. Once you, for example, let's say like we have dimensionality and stuff, we have like a fifth dimensional construct. It's gonna be infinitely higher than said lower fourth dimensional construct that is infinitely lower. Now, when we said infinity in this case, well, is we differentiate some levels of infinity. There could be a set of frameworks that holds the value of infinity. The set of frameworks like infinite 3D or whatever, and infinite 4D scale, and then those are infinity in this, it has like no limit. And then once it is contained by set framework, such as 4 dimensions and 3 dimensions, it holds the distinctions between infinity uh 4 dimensions and the infinity of 3 dimensions or infinity of 5 dimensions. So if you were to set to gauge that around like the semantics or the foundation of variables S and subset of S's and all the truths of the propositions between set S, feel like logically distinct, divided infinitely, and you say it's all extrinsic in a sense, I wouldn't necessarily say this is still a contradiction to omniscience. Since I think the purpose of omniscience is to know everything, right? It knows absolutely everything, every form of set S. And if it were to derive the foundation of derive the proposition proof from set S, once it goes upon infinitum, the frameworks would go on and on, which you claim is underivable, can still be contained from an omniscient being. And if you were to say that it's completely like mathematically underivable based thing, I'm just gonna say this, right? Essentially, from our conceivability, we can view it as undeemable to be derived from mathematical variables. And if you were to say that the extrinsic attribute of subset S, which is the proposition S, and claim that it's true from both propositions that go extrinsically in each framework that goes infinitely divided by such, and you were to try to conceptualize these specific frameworks, logically speaking, you cannot conceive and derive from a logical conclusion because it goes upon infinitely. Now, I would say between an omniscient being, which we would derive from a classical theistic attribute, which is omnipotence, omnibenevolent, and omniscience, or probably even omnipresence. So the God essentially has all knowledge and basically all the powers that is like relational to the universe, and the set of all knowledge that He creates are based upon made from like his ability or like his powers because he's like God or whatever. So since this divine entity creates an ad infinitum metaphysically, since he's external to setting this corresponds to physics, the thing that we view as God, he's still unconceivable from our mind. So since he levels the unconceivability of all these infinities, then logically speaking, his knowledge corresponds to omniscience, which is an attribute that he pertains to. The same with omnipotence and omnibenevolent or whatever. Since we know that he is definitely external to our universe, and we do know in fact is unconceivable, the same as you claim is mathematically underivable. And once I claim that is definitely inconceivable from our viewpoint, logically speaking, God can conceive of said things because since his level of conceivability is infinitely greater than said conceivability that we deem as from our knowledge of carnality. Now, since we know for a fact that all we really have to conclude or derive from a mathematical set is that it goes upon infinitely, and when once the external, it literally just basically just a higher forms of infinity, like 3D infinity, 4D infinity, or just a cardinality or omega, or like aleph one, aleph two, all those infinities from like set theory or cardinality, which we deem as again, it's basically just infinities on an extrinsic level outside of said infinities that we deem as underivable and unconceivable, and that's based on our perception, which is in correspondence towards a divine entity that that contains a higher form of conceivability, and since by higher forms and inconceivability, and he holds said proposition power between knowledge and all of this, then he would grant the fact that he has the ability to conceive of all these and higher inconceivabilities from our human mind, and therefore, via God being a divine creator which contains an omniscient knowledge, it would derive that the fact he would be able to derive from like he would able to contain the knowledge of like an infinite set, and that once it contains an infinite set, just the fact that he finds both all of them conceivable, but it's just an infinitely greater scale upon both conceivability that he has on a subset of like a proposition on that. Yeah. No, that was the biggest gap I had. Continue, bro. Yeah, continue, bro. Continue.
Yeah, so let's XXY as the set of all dimensional criteria. The dimension of criteria between dimension 1 and dimension 2 are infinitely so dimension 2 will be infinitely greater than dimension 1. Then let's say we go to dimension infinity, right? We're going to start going to different hierarchies of infinity, right? So if we say dimension 2 is greater than dimension 1, necessarily you're saying that dimension 2 is necessarily infinitely greater than dimension 1. Okay, then what about if you say dimension 3 is greater than dimension 2? Then that's going to be another infinity, right? So you're going to have multiple hierarchy sets of infinity, which is going to be greater. So if you try to say that dimension 3 is now greater than dimension 1, this scale a way bigger form of infinity or a bigger hierarchy, my bad, right? And I'm saying, and so see, he didn't understand the argument, because I said that when we talk about set theoretic sets, we're talking about sets that are derivable by all hierarchies of infinity. I'm saying if you try to assign every single proper a proper class to a proposition, necessarily power class S is going to be greater than S in cloud. If you continue this beyond just like how you do with dimensions, then this is going to entail some type. This is going to entail some type of the undefinable cardinal beyond infinite, right? So basically, my point is that we have to include premise 6 again. Since PS is greater than S, there can be no one-to-one correspondence bijection between S and PS, meaning the being cannot know all subsets of S if it only knows S. Now, think about it, because you cannot actually conceptualize. You cannot conceptualize undefinable cardinals, and I'm saying that if we infinitely multiply the hierarchies of infinite to the point we just go outside of the hierarchy of infinite as a whole, we just go external to the concept of infinity, then we're going to have some set that is undefinable, because in set theory we have something called set theoretic sets. Set theoretic sets can include multiple higher forms or hierarchies of infinity, correct? But the problem is, when we talk about power sets of propositions, by the concept of ordinals, the principle of ordinality, we can still have something greater than set theoretic sets. And but that something is not even going to be derivable in reality. It can't even exist in reality because it's the undefinable set. It's just going to be abstractly descriptive. For example, if you see a contradiction, it has both predicates of X and not X. It can still exist as an instrumental understanding, but this instrumental understanding cannot be actualized in the extramental reality. So yes, the same thing about the principle of ordinality. We can have something greater than or external to all hierarchies of infinity, but this hierarchy of infinity, that's where this ordinal that is external to the hierarchy of infinity is underivable, because then you cannot consider them a set theoretic set by set theory. And this is agreed upon by every single person who studies ZFC logic. Right? So therefore, you're going to be stuck in the problem where God's knowledge is underivable, because we have XXY being necessarily the subset that exists within S, and the subset of X contains all power classes. This is going to reach into a form of ordinality external to all hierarchies of infinity. Anything external to all hierarchies of infinity cannot be classified as a set theoretic set. Something that's not a set theoretic set cannot even be defined as a set. And this is agreed upon by all mathematicians who study GFC logic and agrees with it. So therefore, everything you just said, yeah, sure, but it's still, again, you're still going to be stuck in a problem where God's knowledge is mathematically underivable.
Like, yeah. So once I like gave a rebuttal, do you agree we could go to conclusions and like?
Yeah,
Because
so you can go
like,
to conclusion.
well, Loki, this is kind of fun, bro. Not gonna lie, bro. I haven't debated on set theory, and you're kind of knowledgeable on this, so I would grab as a respect that. I'll just clap. Yeah, so we can like go to conclusions after this, right?
I bet.
Okay, sure. So, all right. So to essentially just recap again what you just said, there's just some form of like greater extrinsic attributes of infinity, and once it goes out of infinitum to higher frameworks of infinity, it's still underivable. And you claim that even if God,
Wait, one second, you got a
yeah,
problem. I'm saying we can have something that is fully external to all hierarchies infinity. It cannot even be defined by infinite sets. Like even infinity, like it exists outside of infinity completely. Like all, like out of nowhere or whatever. Like it exists outside of all hierarchies of
yeah, I get that. So essentially, you're saying all of the extrinsic attributes of this specific infinity is external to this set of infinite infinities that you claim is like the variable of S or like the subset of S, right?
I'm saying, hold on, we're saying
Oh,
anything
no,
external. Yeah, no, it can
yeah,
exist like anything. One second. Actually, I'm saying like anything external to infinity, like fully. It's external. It's external to all type of infinities or external to all frameworks of infinity. This ordinal is going to be undefinable or underivable by set theory, right? And then I'm saying all subsets of S, for example, will have this amount of like let's call this ordinal like infinities. We're going to call it X. Okay? Yeah. So
okay,
basically,
yeah,
the subset of X is going to have an amount of propositions. And an X amount of propositions, like we explained before, is underivable by set theory.
yeah, I get that. So that's exactly what like I'm just trying to get out, and you just understand it. Just like extrapolate even further. So essentially, you're saying something external to infinity is basically above every forms of infinity, right? That it's
Yeah.
underivable. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
cannot conceptualize some form of infinity. I mean, not infinity, but some form of framework external to every form of infinity, right?
Bet. Yeah.
Yeah, so from like set theory, the thing I'm just trying to say here, we have like L zero, L one, L two. You claim that all these set things can be external to infinity, but yet all these set things that we have the set of infinity, and we have another thing that's greater than the set of infinity, and we have another which is L one, L two. Those are like some form of higher frameworks of infinite hierarchies external from each other. That's what like that's the full set theory is upon like aleph or like cardinality or whatever. So to
Hold on.
essentially just
Hold on. There's a problem.
wait, what?
What's that? I'm saying it's external to all forms of infinity. It's outside of Aleph null. It's instead of like Aleph one, Aleph two. It's like it transcends all. It transcends like all hierarchies and frameworks of infinity. Transcends all of them.
Wait, so
And
by saying that it's infinitely underivable by claiming that each external to each infinity is completely underivable, and that is like what you said as something that is inconceivable based upon how it's going upon ad infinitum. Each ad infinitum is completely external to said infinity. So I'm just gonna say it again, right? What we deemed as fucking inconceivable is based upon our human perception to understand the variable set and the infinite the regress of set and all that. But I'm like claiming said thing that God created everything in the universe, and if he had the properties, which is the classical theistic properties, is omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolent. Via omnipotence, he has the power to create basically everything and do anything. So if he were to create a universe that contains all these sets and claim that these propositions were to go infinitely ad infinitum, each greater than the set of set, which we deem as a proposition, and since God, well, essentially what I'm saying again is, well, have a greater form of power, and he's the one that created all of this thing. And if we were to deem in fact omniscience the same level as the omnipotence, since both properties are literally from classical theistic properties, he would have the attributes to be capable of conceiving something that is completely external, unconceivable to our mind. And that's the thing with God, is because as we said again, he's also unconceivable. He cannot literally be conceived. He does not exist in our fucking framework. He completely is external to our universe. And while God's knowledge completely derives from something external and deemed as something infinity, he has the power to deem things unconceivable and to go upon each proposition externally. Now, if that would be the case, right, he would have the ability to conceive said thing that you deem as something mathematically underivable. And I would just say this again, Like if you were to say something external from infinity, that's completely something that is underivable from our conceivability, etc., etc. But all it's saying is just going infinitely. If it goes infinitely, every form of intrinsic attributes, meaning if you were to grant the fact that it still can be conceivable by a higher being, it's just inconceivable from our mindset, right? All right, so let me just give you an example. Let's say that we have a drawing, right? Let's say we have a drawing. We have a stick man or whatever. His name is Harry. So he knows like all sets of I mean like he tries to conceive of a set of proposition infinitely higher than him, and he's able to conceptualize that by like conceptualizing a human. I mean not human, but like something greater than his 2D two-dimensional cosmology or whatever. Now let's draw another third-dimensional cosmology in a paper. Let's say that it was gonna be greater than Harry's cosmology. Then, if Harry were to conceive of said thing that's unconceivable, logically speaking, this form of said theory of infinity is unconceivable to Harry. But the human that created Harry and the paper is completely outside of said unconceivability, meaning he has the attributes to be able to understand said unconceivability. So if it were to just go on infinitely, it's completely mathematically underivable from our mindset, but external to that, it's something that we can that God understand. Even if you say it's just infinitely going ad infinitum, God can still contain those attributes by understanding them specifically since he's above those set attributes, meaning metaphysically he can understand set S and the proposition set S, the truthfulness of both propositions and the variable S, which said Sigmund Harry doesn't have the ability. Now logically speaking, if we connotate that or correlate that to our IRL cosmology, we humans try to understand set of proposition S going upon infinity. We try to understand the form of infinity external to something infinity and greater to other forms of infinity. We cannot understand that obviously because it's unconceivable. So via the paper thing, like the Harry thing, the paper analogy, we could grant that IRL. Now, if we can grant that IRL, then God is gonna be the human. The humans are gonna be the drawings, which is Harry. So logically speaking, since there's a greater form of being out there that can contain an infinite knowledge, the infinite knowledge is just completely extrinsic from our mind, completely underivable. But for God, He is something also extrinsic from our mind. He has the ability to do so, and therefore He contains that thing, and there's no contradiction to that. The only thing that you can deem as contradictions is the fact that it goes upon infinitely, which doesn't work. It's because you can still contain something infinitely, but you contain to have the same level of that infinity, and you can still derive and contain that said thing, like having an infinite packages you can still actualize, you can still contain an infinite packages, but not the fact that you can underive it. You still contain all of those things, just goes upon infinitely. The only problem is you contain all those things, but those things that don't contain those things are infinitely weaker than you, which deems those packages as unconceivable. But you, it doesn't. You don't deem them as unconceivable, but you contain all of them. And since you contain all of them, meaning you contain an infinite set of propositions, that's true, and the value of both of all the propositions between the packages. But yeah, but it just goes up ad infinitum, and I don't see the contradiction in that. It's like containing something infinitely, but you still conceive of it. And if you conceive of it, you have the knowledge upon it. Therefore, you contain every knowledge of things within the universe, including all propositions of S and the proposition and set of variable S. And therefore, since you have all of that thing, logically speaking, you my bad. Therefore, omniscience can contain all forms of knowledge in the universe, which humans don't have. So we can conclude. I could go first. You can go last if you want.
Yeah, I want to give my conclusion now. Can I give my conclusion?
You want me to go first, so you can have the last argument?
Uh, I don't, man. You have too much, man. I'm not gonna lie, man.
Oh
I
yes,
want to
sir.
go. Yeah, okay.
Go first. Go
Yeah,
first.
okay. So first of all, his first argument about God knowing the. One sec. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So again, Axiom's first argument about the set being known by God but not known by us because we have a different level of conceivability. And there's a problem already. I'm saying that it's external to infinite fully. Like it's not even infinity. Like you can't even say it's infinity. Like is fully outside of all cardinals. It's outside of all cardinal elements. You cannot even define it as a cardinal. This is something greater than all sets of infinity. It's greater than Aleph 1, Aleph 2, Aleph 3, Aleph infinite, power infinite, etc. and etc. It is fully external to the concept of infinity. Now, such a cardinal is not logically definable. You cannot define it by the sets of logic, because then it's not even a set by mathematical terms or set theoretic sets. You agreed that God knowledge is a set, okay? If you agree that God's knowledge is a set, then even if you try to say that, so hold on, listen to that, because first of all, you said God's knowledge is a set. Then you said, okay, yeah, sure, it might be underivable, but for God, it can be derivable since He exists on a higher plane or not dimensional criteria. I mean, a metaphysical criteria where He can understand all sets of propositions. But the problem with this is that it's not logically possible to understand. It's not logically possible to understand a proposition which has a subset of a number that is not even defined mathematically, because then you can't even say that God has this much amount of knowledge, right? For example, if any number that's undefinable, right, is not even a number, because when you define a number, for example, if you say 1, 2, if you see 2 balls, you see like, yeah, that's 2 balls. But if you see an undefined amount of balls, right, that undefinable amount like doesn't even really exist. So for God to know all truths, you would have to know all subsets of the set of all truth, and all subsets of the set of truth contains all power sets. All power sets, the amount of all power sets that exist within S would be would be external to any infinite framework. Therefore, this thing is logically undefinable, and God can do all things that is logically possible. God's not an illogical entity. He's a logical entity, and this ordinal that I'm talking about is external to any logical deduction or like logical derivable set.